was incarcerated when man did walk on the moon and didn't hear about it for the next 2 years.
The largest inpatient psychiatric facility in the United States is a county jail. The likelihood that you'll go back to prison within 3 years of coming home, 64%. With a bachelor's degree, that goes down to about...
We went to the hole, we got beaten, we got hosed.
When someone returns to incarceration, we are likely increasing the chances of the next generation also being part of that.
Their degree will hold just as much weight as any other.
Pardon me. I received a notice. He expected me to be jubilant, jumping around. She brought another piece of paper back, holding it up. I don't know what happened next. I was on the floor. We were demanding change. With education, it opened up, for me, an entire universe.
Welcome to Education Matters, a podcast brought to you by Penn State's College of Education. Thanks so much for tuning in. In today's episode, we'll learn about the Restorative Justice Initiative, its newly launched prison education program, and how their work improves the lives of justice-impacted individuals and their families right here in Happy Valley. So before we get started, why don't we introduce ourselves and the role you play in the RJI?
Well, Steve, you know me. No, I'm just kidding. So my name's Efrain. I am the director of the Restorative Justice Initiative here at Penn State.
Awesome.
I'm Liana. I'm the assistant director of education at the Restorative Justice Initiative.
My name, Steve, is Irvin Moore. I am with Restorative Justice Initiative as education support and, even more importantly, community liaison.
Fantastic. So I want to start with you, Efrain. Tell us about the Restorative Justice Initiative, the RJI. What is its mission? And tell us some examples of the work that you all do to fulfill that mission.
Well, how long is this podcast?
Right.
No, I appreciate the time.
In 50 words or less.
50 words or less. All right, so I'll try to be brief, and hopefully we can keep talking about it, right? So the Restorative Justice Initiative is an organization that's committed to working with what we call justice-impacted individuals. And so that typically means individuals who are formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated, or impacted by incarceration. And so we put together a myriad of programming to all the individuals who are impacted. So we have programming that happens inside the correctional facility. We do programming that's tied to individuals who will be returning home soon, to individuals who are part of our formal degree program. We also do programs for individuals who are interested in going back to college, maybe after incarceration, or pursuing any type of higher education interest. And then the big part of what we do is also awareness, why this matters, why it's important, why we would do a podcast like this. And as a mission, we really think of education as a human right. And so that's what motivates us. And we see the impacts of this on families and communities. And so that really motivates us to have it be part of our broader mission here at the university.
You use the term justice-impacted individuals, and that strikes me as very intentional and maybe a departure from language that may have been used previously. Tell us a bit about why that particular language is so important.
Yeah, sure. The language is meant to capture a broader umbrella of individuals. There's actually some debate whether we should say system impacted, justice impacted, and I'll kind of leave that there. And I know that's not essentially the purpose of here today, but the idea is that who is impacted by the criminal justice system, and so our take, which is all of us, right? So it's not just the individuals who are currently incarcerated; it's families, communities, our systems, which are strained by the disruption of incarceration. And so, how are we taking a more restorative, a healing way of thinking about working through issues in society? So, justice is impacted. Is a placeholder for people who are formerly, currently, or system impacted by. So a child of somebody who's incarcerated, a sibling of someone who's incarcerated. And when we take that broader approach, everyone that's connected, I think we start to learn about why it's so important to do this work.
Fantastic. Thank you. Liana, so when you started on your path to becoming an educator, I'm willing to bet that prison education wasn't exactly on your radar screen. What inspired you to pursue this particular career?
Yeah, I actually started on a path intending to teach special education. Disability justice has always been central to what I believe in. And As I went through grad school and realized just how many folks with disabilities who are impacted by the justice system, I started realizing that that was the arena where I wanted to make change. I also was really interested in making structural change and not just working day to day on the ground in education, which I do, but also thinking more about how can we move the needle to change things on the bigger scale. So I've been here at Penn State for about 10 years, and during that time, I started teaching with RJI. I taught creative writing. And then when I graduated with my PhD, I came to work here.
She was a great teacher, by the way. She was an excellent teacher.
Yeah. Now you
Learn from the best.
You mentioned, or you said, how many people in the special education area are impacted by the justice system. Does that imply or suggest that perhaps a disproportionately large percentage of people with special needs are impacted?
It does. The largest inpatient psychiatric facility in the United States is a county jail, the LA County Jail, and the Cook County Jail is not far behind that. So I think that tells us a lot about how we as a society treat disability and mental illness. So if we're thinking about how to make structural change, I think incarceration should absolutely be part of the conversation when we talk about disability, neurodivergence, and mental illness.
Fantastic. Irvin, why is prison education so important?
Why not? That's a question that's been asked of me quite often. Why should we even spend money on individuals that have committed crime? My response to that has usually always been over 90+% of the people that are incarcerated in this country will one day come home. Now, an adjacent question to that is then how do we want them to come home? Do we want them to come home the same way they went in or worse? Do we want them to come home as predators, as individuals who have not learned one thing about moving about in this society as a human being, the roles and obligations and responsibilities of being a human being in this society? So I was in prison. I was one of the individuals that Efrain mentioned when he said justice impacted. Now, they didn't always used to call us that. But I'm somewhat glad that they do, because it touches part of who I am as a human being. I was not born a felon. I was not always doing felonious kinds of things. And I don't want to be seen forever as an ex-felon. So justice impacted is who I am. And justice impacted on the inside meant a lot of things in the old days. One of the things that it didn't mean is that we would be educated, because I was in there at a time when there was no education. But I was blessed and I was lucky and I was able to find individuals that could guide me along that particular path. So, in answer to your question, why? Because it's the right thing to do. It's a human thing to do. And we want people coming out here in our society, in our communities, that are able to fend for themselves, that are responsible. So, Education, yes.
You said 90% roughly of folks who are currently incarcerated will one day have the opportunity to reenter society. I know we've talked about this in the past, but I think it's a great statistic to mention. Recidivism. What is the rate of recidivism for folks who are released who perhaps have not been able to engage in some sort of educational program while incarcerated versus those who do?
It's about 67% at this stage. 64%. But the likelihood that you'll go back to prison within 3 years of coming home, 64%. If any other institution in our society had, a 35% success rate, I think we'd be looking pretty critically at it. So with a bachelor's degree, that goes down to about 5%, and with a master's, it's less than 1%. Wow. So it really is, we always lead with the fact that we do this work because we think education is a human right. And there are all these other benefits as well.
Right. What are some of the challenges that you all have faced in getting the prison education program up and running? And what are some of the misconceptions that you encountered during that process? I chuckle because again, how much
We're
time do we
laughing
have?
together.
So we've worked together. So I think, so would you like misconceptions or challenges first?
Let's try misconceptions that may have fueled the challenges.
Fair. Part of this is why, and I think understanding the broader impact of the reason why we do this work, right? Irvin had talked about the humanity in this. All the individuals that are impacted by someone who's incarcerated, communities, and I think over time we've seen growing by nonpartisan support for this, because I think we've seen the stretch and impact go across communities in Pennsylvania and around the country, and so I think. Over time, people start to understand that, and I think there's a stigma attached very much to this, right? So people don't often talk about a relative, someone they know who's incarcerated, a family member, friends. And so what we're doing is giving space to talk more about that, right? So how this has impacted all of our lives and why it matters and where we're putting in time, effort, energy, and resources, right? And what we've learned is, the United States has the largest population of people who are incarcerated. And I don't mean that per capita, although that's still true.
That was going to be my
we put
question.
more people in prison than we do anywhere else in the world, right? So it's pretty alarming. We're at about 2 million people that we are removing of their families, communities, and impacting all of us. And so, that urgency to address what's becoming a very big social issue has been pressing us, and drawing those connections has been a big part of that work, why it matters, why we need support, why it's connected to our land grant mission here at Penn State, for example, right? So what's the impact of that in all its citizens, a group that often had been not acknowledged when we're thinking about the types of supports we're putting into it. And then Liana mentioned, and the outcomes of that do benefit all of us, right? So everyone benefits when someone comes home and they have the opportunity to contribute to the workforce, when they have an opportunity to be reunited with family, to break the cycles, right? So unfortunately, the biggest way to the biggest piece of this is when someone returns to incarceration, we are likely increasing the chances of the next generation also being part of that. But when we break that, right, we stop that. So we allow not only for the individual to have space to engage in ways that are supportive of them and their families, but their children and their children's children have a greater shot of being able to engage and be successful. So we've led with that as a broader narrative and understanding why this work matters. And the challenges have been building that coalition of support across the state, from communities to faculty to leadership in our higher education institutions, to understand why that matters. And we're not alone. This is happening across the country. States have found support in this. The federal government has also been helpful in kind of shifting supports for that, and so has the state. And again, pretty bipartisan, right? As we've realized that it's impacting all communities, we've really started to see some support shift and really targeting this need that's been there for a very long time.
So the prison education program launched in January of 2025, but that doesn't mean that the decision to start it took place in December of 2024. Liana, you lead the PEP. Tell us a bit, if possible, again, about the pathway to getting the program even envisioned and imagined to where we got to launch. Not exactly an overnight success.
No. Well, all credit for the visionary piece to Efrain, because he started asking these questions 10 years ago.
Hey, this is a great time to remind you that if you're enjoying what you're learning today, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, or leave us some feedback in the comments section about what we've discussed today or what you'd like to see in a future episode. Now back to our guests. 10 years ago.
10 years ago. And
Okay.
I jumped on board a little over 3 years ago. But I think the day I started, I thought that we might get up and running by fall 2023, and it took us until January 25. So 10 to add to some of the challenges that Efrain mentioned, what we're doing is inherently against the grain of what these institutions were built for, right? Prisons are not built to be open to education and to knowledge and to the world. Universities are not built to be going inside of a prison and working in that environment. So we do this all with the recognition that every step we take is a win, right? And it was against the grain and it was hard fought. And so, it's been a long journey, but along the way, we've been able to offer workshops. So we've been inside, we've been providing educational opportunities before we were able to provide this degree program. So it doesn't all start and end with a degree program, but that has been kind of our crowning achievement, I guess, on top of all of these workshops that we've been able to use to reach students.
And you're referring to the students. So specify or clarify, these are Penn State students who are incarcerated and are enrolled in this program. Can you explain a bit maybe about, how we enroll them, the degree that they're pursuing, so people understand?
Yeah, our students are getting a bachelor's degree in rehabilitation and human services through Penn State. So their degree will hold just as much weight as any other. The degree won't say Penn State Prison Education Program. Right. It'll say Penn State, as it should. So the bachelor's degree is only the second in the state of Pennsylvania. Villanova is the other one. They've been a really long-standing shining beacon for a lot of us. And ours joins them as the second bachelor's degree in the state. Fantastic.
And as far as, tell us a bit too about you thought you might be ready to go in 2023, but there were some delays. I imagine it might have been related to funding or tuition, things like that.
Yes.
You able to? Yes. Are you able to explain a little bit about some of the hurdles you had to clear?
How far back do you want to go?
We could talk a bit about maybe Second Chance Pell.
Okay. Maybe I'll start and then pass the baton. So in 2019, we gained a lot of support, started building coalitions. So while I appreciate, yes, I've been part of this for 10 years, it's really been with the work of colleagues, faculty, staff, students, community members, nonprofit organizations, all that have really supported this effort to, ensure that, we are meeting our Lane Grant mission and thinking about academic opportunities and supports for individuals inside. So around 2019, 2020, right before 2020, we did get a lot of support from multiple units and particularly the president at the time. And there was a strategic planning grant, and that strategic planning grant was to think about gaps in the things that we can and should be doing. And so we applied and didn't get it the first time and applied again. And we got support from the leadership at the time to explore this opportunity to tie the work we were already doing. We were doing not-for-credit programming.
When you say leadership, not to interrupt, but you mean
University.
Penn State,
yeah, Penn
right?
State
The
University.
president of Penn State and leadership of the university.
Yes, I'm also meaning there was support from the Department of Corrections secretary at the time too, and the Department of Education. What we did was we put everyone in the room at the same time. So we held this 3-day conference and brought in programs from around the country that were doing similar work. We brought in Cornell, we brought in UCLA, we brought in Berkeley, we brought in programs that have been doing this to the University of Illinois. We brought in Rutgers, particularly because they were Big Ten institutions who were doing this type of work already and doing it well and successfully. And so we got that helped us make the case that, this is something that's been a need for a while and we should be engaging with this. And we did receive the planning grant. And then 2020 came in. 2020 came with rethinking and reshaping priorities and adjusting. We didn't lose momentum. We just shifted some of that to a statewide effort to build coalition across different higher education institutions. So what that allowed us is to really bring together and extend the work we were doing with other institutions who were already having some degree programs in the state. And then with the reintegration of Pell, so the federal government provided that they would open up Pell beyond Second Chance Pell, which is a pilot program supported by both administrations, federal. There was this pitch to have this be, rather than just the pilot, to have open to any incarcerated student for any institution who's Pell eligible to offer a degree. And so that shifted. That law was proposed in like 22, went into action in 23. And so we applied for a subsequent grant externally to help prepare us to launch our own program. So we were back in motion somewhere around 22, 23, right around the same time that we brought in Liana. So this is me passing the baton.
Yeah. So, Steve, you mentioned Second Chance Pal. That started in 2015, 2016 as that experimental resurgence of Pell Grants for incarcerated students. We're now out of the experimental phase and everyone can access it. So we're among a lot of programs that are rebuilding. And I say rebuilding specifically because I'm teeing you up to say that prison education is not new. We're not... It feels groundbreaking right now, but it's important to remember that there's a really long history here, that there were 300-something programs in the United States in 1994 when the Tough on Crime bill pulled Pell Grants. The field collapsed from about 300 programs to 8 that survived that period. So again, we're rebuilding, but there are folks who've come before us.
So, Irvin, in terms of the history of prison education in this country, what was your experience, say, in the 70s? Or when did you first come in contact with prison education, and how has that evolved?
I entered into the Pennsylvania Bureau of Corrections July 18th, 1969, 2 days after man walked on the moon. I didn't know man had walked on the moon. Oh, I made an error 2 days before man walked on the moon. Because I was incarcerated when man did walk on the moon and didn't hear about it for the next 2 years. Now, something as monumental as man walking on the moon for the first time in existence, and we didn't know about it? How could that be? It's incredulous. That could be because prisons was another dimension, Steve. It was unlike anything anyone could ever imagine. There were no radio. Imagine a place with no radio, which means concurrently there's no music. There was no television. So, of course, we couldn't watch television to see man walking on the moon. There were no books except for the Bible in your cell. There were no periodicals. There were no newspapers. There was no library. And even more importantly, there was no school. That was prison. Everywhere, not just in Pennsylvania, that was prison. And Efrain mentioned 2019. I had been incarcerated for 50 years at that time when the resurgence of education, something that we started again in the late 60s, early 70s, when we begged, we clawed, we fought, we screamed, we pleaded, we hollered, we went to the hole, we got beaten, we got holes. And why? Because we were demanding change. Change in an era of change, because this is the 1960s. If anyone looks back on history, and they will look at the 1960s and say, this is the most climactic period of change in the history of man. Change in music, change in art, change in dress, change in architecture, change in the economy, change in politics, the women's lib movement, the anti-war movement, the flower children, black power, civil rights. All of these things were occurring during this period, and we were impacted just the same. The advocates that existed out in the larger community impacted us as well, and they heard our cries. And something as basic, something as human, we didn't say, open the doors and let us out. We said, bring education in here for us, please. And they heard our cries. This is in 1969 to 1970. There was an African-American warden, they were called wardens then, at Graterford Penitentiary where I was incarcerated. The first African-American warden in the history of Pennsylvania. Progressive. And we went to him. We said, please. He said, well, look, let me listen to your proposal. And we had formed an inmate organization called the Coordinated Education Extension Program, CEEP, C-E-E-P. I was so proud of it. I was one of the founding members of it, and I was a youngster. And we laid our proposal out to the warden, which asked for education, asked for a degree-oriented program to be brought into the institution for us. He said, well, let's see what you can do with that. I'm going to put it in your hands and see what you can do. We sat down and we wrote letters. We talked. We couldn't make phone calls then because we could only make 2 phone calls a year. But we wrote and we contacted people on the outside, and we managed to have 5 universities and colleges that responded and came back into the institution to speak with us, with the administration. And when they left at the end of that day, and this was Villanova, this was Cheney, this was Northampton Area County Community College, this was Montgomery County Community College, and one other. When they left at the end of that day, we had formed a consortium who agreed that they would matriculate and bring in courses and classes and professors and students to help us actualize what we asked for, which was a post-secondary education extension program.
What impact did even just the opportunity to start discussing and imagining these kinds of programs have on either your personal experience or the larger culture?
The impact that this had, Steve, was monumental. It impacted every aspect of incarceration. I mean this with all my heart. It impacted everything. It changed everything. Imagine when I say we had no radio, no television, we had no means to communicate amongst each other because you couldn't be in groups of more than 2. But we had education now. We had school. We had professors coming in. We had classes that were ongoing. So this opened the door for everything else that preceded. It was during this time that I fell in love with the possibilities of education. I was such an intelligent young man, but dumb as a brick. I attained a lot of information. I carried a lot of knowledge around with me, but didn't know how to use it. I could spout facts at the drop of a hat. People would turn to me to ask Irvin. He knows. Ask Irvin. Irvin, tell him this. But I didn't know how to walk a straight line. I had to learn that through the power of education, you gain control of who you are as an individual, as a human being. Through the power of education, I learned that there's nothing more valuable than your role and your obligation within your community. And I had to come to prison to learn this. It's a shame, but I did. So everything for me and everything for my fellow prisoners changed at the drop of a hat, just because we were able to become educated and look past a particular point of our departure. We could look into a future and what was possibilities. And this coming from a man who was serving a life sentence. And a lot of people even today, don't understand or realize that what they mean in Pennsylvania when you have a life sentence is that you're going to die in prison. It's not like you see on television. Yeah, you get 15 to life, 20 to life, 25 to life. That's only in the movies or in other states. There were 4 states in the United States that did not have parole for life, and Pennsylvania was one of them, being one of the oldest states that was established under puritanical rule. So, and the birthplace of penitentiaries in the nation was Pennsylvania. So, my future, for all intents and purposes, on one hand, looked bleak. So he's going to die here anyway. But with education, it opened up for me an entire universe.
Wow. I wish we had unlimited time. I could just tap into you and let you keep going. So the prison education program, it's up, it's running, it's making its sort of baby steps and learning how to fly. What are its goals for the future, and where do you all see it going? Why don't we start with you, Efrain?
Yeah, sure. By the way, you get to see how great it is we get to work with Irvin every day.
Yeah.
So it's a guiding star, and in like how we think about the work, and we typically lean into the fact that we're building this together, right? And so I appreciate the legacy that Irvin has put there, that gave us the space to introduce Penn State to that work, recently, right? Because this is, we're only in our first year of doing that. I know that it's been important to us to think about this through the lens of what our students want. And so, even before we started the degree, we were working with individuals who had expressed over time that they wanted to see a degree that allowed them to be connected to those impacted by that system, the very same system that many of them have been impacted by themselves. And so rehabilitation and human services felt like a really good fit, right? So it was an opportunity for them to take leadership in the spaces, focus on individuals through either the recovery lens or a counseling adjacent type of fields. And so it was a good fit and one that was guided by individuals over time in our program before we got the degree up and going. And so I think we're trying to figure out how to do that now. And so one of the things that's kind of surfaced as a result of this work is, more and more people who are justice impacted, who are currently Penn State students, are coming to us for supports, thinking about how we better support students, alumni, individual in higher education spaces. So the reintegration of Pell means that there are going to be more and more students who are justice impacted on our campuses. And so how are we creating a space that's welcoming and supportive become key questions. And I think we have been leaning into that and grateful that, at Penn State, through the College of Education and existing supports through leadership here at the university, to think about how to better serve individuals who are part of that system in higher education. And so we're building it together is the shortest version of that. And so we have a student organization. We have 2 student organizations that we advise and are part of, and they are plugged in frequently. And everyone on the team really works to think about how we lead with those values and the way we build out that program. We would like to see more students, and that certainly is coming. But then what does it mean when they graduate? How do we support them as alumni? So we're asking very important questions and making sure that we continue to do right by our students and our community tends to be how we've been approaching those questions about goals and not just thinking about student enrollment.
This work is challenging, as we stated earlier. And so this question is for Liana. What keeps you inspired to continue, and what have been some of your most rewarding experiences thus far?
One of the things that I think about a lot that builds on what Efrain was saying about supporting communities and not just thinking about individual student enrollment is how are we not just taking one individual and uplifting them up and out of their community, but rather spreading support and access to education throughout whole communities, because nobody should have to go to prison to get a college education, right? So inaccess to education is also a huge issue. So one of the things that does keep me going is when I go to class inside the prisons and people report back that the content of the class helped them make a connection with this family member or that family member, or it helped them speak with a younger generation in their family about connecting on study strategies or just college life. And so using education as a connector rather than something that will separate somebody from their community is something that keeps me going. And those little moments where we get glimpses of that happening are really rewarding.
So what role has philanthropy played in achieving your goals to date? And what role can philanthropic partners play moving forward?
We're laughing because we work with you, Steve. So.
That's called teeing you up.
Yeah, but also because I think this builds on what I was just saying about in access to education, right? That tuition is a really big sticking point for most students, and it's important for us that this comes at no cost to our incarcerated students who are making, I think there was a recent raise, something like 20 to 45 cents an hour now, which in the perspective of how expensive tuition is at every college and university, philanthropy is what helps us close that gap and not let the burden rest on the shoulders of students.
What would you say? And I know that there have been a few champions behind the scenes who have really helped.
Thank you to those champions.
Yes.
I was just
you know who
going to
you
say,
are.
what would you
Appreciate
say to those who have empowered your work, or to listeners who are considering becoming philanthropic partners with the College of Ed?
It matters. And so, I mean, we gave the statistics, and the hard part is that, we can't bring our students here, but we have the honor of like learning with them, going into the classroom space. And, it matters. You're it's not just supporting one student. It is really doing some, we talk about change in the College of Education, some meaningful change. And so, donors, the philanthropic work has given us the space to do some really meaningful, impactful things, to the family members, to the students, to everyone who's seen the result of that. So we really appreciate that, and appreciate that you've given us the space to kind of invite more to be a champion of that cause that really does make a big difference, even if you don't get to see our students, or maybe one day you will, and they'll be sharing their stories.
Now, Irvin, right on cue, you are known around the college and around campus for your iconic companion who has just woken up from a nap and now she's going back down. Tell us a bit about Cora and some of your history with dog training.
Well, in order to tell you a bit about Cora, I would have to tell you something about her predecessors. Because I came to Efrain, came to Restorative Justice Initiative through a, what would you call it? An action of executive authority by the governor of this state when I was granted clemency, March 25th, 2021. Before that, I had been incarcerated at Graterford for 26 years, at Rockview for 26 years, right down the road. They started a program 7 years prior that involved dogs, that involved training us to be canine handlers and dog trainers for the purpose of training service animals. And if a dog didn't meet the criteria of becoming a service animal, they would become an ideal pet. And I begged to be placed into that program because I hadn't had the opportunity to touch a dog. And I grew up with dogs in over 50 years, almost 50 years at that time. And I begged. They said, Irvin, or they were calling me Mr. Irvin this time. I had went past the Irvin stage, the Irv stage. So I was Mr. Irv. Mr. Irv, don't even worry about it. You know you're going to be one of our first candidates. So I was allowed into the program. And, it was magnificent. It was par excellence, and I learned so much. This was right before COVID hit. Now, once COVID hit, right before COVID hit, I was given a dog who they said was untrainable because he was old, he was huge, he was a St. Bernard full blood. He was at that time 150 pounds. And they say he didn't even have name recognition. But I was good. Believe me, when I say I was good, I don't pat myself on the back, but I do. So they brought Fred in. His name was Fred. They said, well, Mr. Irv, here he is. Let's see what you can do with him. I said, okay, thank you. Look, I appreciate that. And they left. I brought Fred to my cell. First thing Fred did was ran and jumped on the bed. No. Jumped on the cot because we have no beds in prison. We have cots. So he jumped on the cot, and I said, well, that's okay. All my dogs can get on the cot, and we do this together. I went to sit down and found that I had no place to sit. Now, my cot was my bench, my stool, my workplace. I was an artist as well. I was a budding musician, and I read and I studied all on my cot. So I told Fred, look, get off. Get down. He looked at me. He just turned and looked. I said, down. And he came off the bed and laid on the ground. I took my mattress off of the cot and put it on the floor right next to him. And that's where he and I remained for the next 3 days and nights. I would touch him. I would rub him. I would call his name. I would give him treats. I would tell him to get up. I would tell him to sit down. I would tell him to lay. I would tell him to come here over and over and over again. Consistency, patience. Then I would rub him. I would pet him. I would look into his eyes as he looked in mine, let him know I cared about him. 3 days later, the team came back in. Where's Mr. Irv? Oh, where's Fred? I came to the door, and they said, Mr. Irv, the people out here, they want you. So I walked out. They were sitting adjacent to me. I walked straight ahead, the middle of the common area. And I turned around and looked at them and said, what's wrong? Where's Fred? I turned around and looked at my cell. The door it wasn't shut closed, it was just closed. I said, Fred. The door swung open. A huge head came to the door and looked out and looked at me. They looked at it. I said, come. Fred walked over to me about 20, 25 feet. Got next to me. I turned him around. We proceeded up the stairs, around the tier, all the way around the other steps coming down. We came down the steps, walked over to where the folk were sitting. I stopped, looked at Fred and said, sit. Fred sat down. They were sitting there with their mouths open. They had never seen anything. Fred, obeying commands? Fred was big. He was big and glorious and friendly and loving. So COVID struck. So for the next almost 2 years, there was not a bit of movement on the inside of the prison, nowhere except for the guards themselves. This had never occurred in the 50-odd years I had been incarcerated. Never occurred more than a day or two. But there was no movement. But Fred and I went everywhere. And what I mean by that? Once the warden saw the impact that Fred had on everyone, he said, Mr. Herb, can you take Fred over to the hole so the guys over there can see Fred? Maybe by saying Fred, they'll stop acting up. Can you take Fred over to the psychological ward so the guys over there, they would like to see Fred? Maybe we can let one or two of them come out and pet Fred. Can you take him over to the hospital? Can you take him over to the infirmary? Can you take him to the hospice where the men are dying? That's what we did. We went everywhere. The inner area looked like a wasteland, no movement whatsoever. But you would see two figures moving. That was Fred and I, walking from one block to another, to the staff areas, over to the hole, to the infirmary. And we did this until I received a notice one night.
Hey, everyone, if you would like to learn more about how you could support either the Restorative Justice Initiative, the Prison Education Program, or any other aspect of the College of Education, please feel free to reach out to me, Steve Wilson, Director of Development for the college. I'm at stw2@psu.edu. We'd love to chat with you.
And we did this until I received a notice one night that the governor had signed my writ of commutation. I was standing there surrounded by all of the administration at the time, wardens, the deputy wardens, the director of treatments, all the administration who knew me from the time I had put in. And we had respect, mutual respect. And they presented the proclamation to me, and I just looked at it. At first, I couldn't believe it, because it had only been 3 weeks since the Pardons Board had said, we're going to grant this, but we'll send it to the governor, see what he says. So I expect to wait another year. It was 3 weeks. So when they presented this to me, Fred was laying at my feet, and I just looked down, and I said, oh, man. They expected me to be jubilant, jumping around, screaming, hollering. But all I could think about was, I am going to have to leave Fred. I was going to leave him, no doubt. But, boy, my heart was breaking. The warden at that time, she was comparatively new. She looked at me and said, Mr. Irvin, what's wrong? I just looked down and said, Fred. She says, oh, I should not have done this way. I didn't know what she was talking about. She went back to the bench that she was standing at the table where she had retrieved the initial proclamation. She brought another piece of paper back, holding it up with its backside facing me so I couldn't see what it was. I said, what's this, a copy? She said, read it. I took it. I turned around and looked. I said, yeah, it's a copy. Because I could see the old English black lettering. I could see the seal. I said, it's another copy. She said, Mr. Irv, you're one of the most educated individuals in this room. Read that, please. The first thing my eyes fell on was, pardon me, this happens every time. But the first thing my eyes fell on was the words, in the case of Fred Moore, the dog. I don't know what happened next. I was on the floor. I had my knees had given out. I was just on the floor hugging Fred because I knew Fred was going home with me. I didn't know when, but I knew Fred was going home with me. The warden says, and the governor said to make sure to tell you that you leave tomorrow morning, you and Fred. Oh. So, Fred was Cora's predecessor. Fred came home with me, and Fred and I went everywhere there was to go in this marvelous world of ours. At that time, I had no car, so we walked. And I was 75 years old, but I felt like I was 25 years old. And we went everywhere. And the impact that Fred had on any and everyone that saw him was automatic. Cars would stop. Buses would roll up and stop. The doors would open. Hey, what is that? What do you got there? Can you bring him over here? We were denied entrance into 2 venues out of all the places we went, and that was only because the person said, look, can you hold it for a minute? Hey, get the manager, bring him in. I got something, I want him to see this. He said, come on in. Fred and I went everywhere. And then, unfortunately, Fred developed a terminal illness, bone cancer, after about 2.5 years, and he passed. My heart was broken again, of course, and I went to pause to see if they could find another St. Bernard, because I wanted a St. Bernard. I wanted something big. I love big dogs. I was taken there by a couple, Tom Songer and his wife Sarah, who had some connections at Pause. They wanted to hear my story as well. So I finished telling them, talking to them, and they says, well, Mr. Moore, we don't usually deal with big dogs like that, but thank you for your story, and we'll keep you in mind. 6 days later, I got a call, a text that said, can you come to Pause and pick your dog up? I said, wait a minute, you guys don't that? I went there, and it was Cora. And they said, now, she's been emotionally and psychologically and physically abused. She's terrified of human beings, and she was. They said, keep her on a leash at all times. Don't walk without the leash because she's a escape artist. She will run in a heartbeat. But this is Cora, who I bring to work. I've been allowed to do that. Thank you so much, Efrain. Thank you so much, Liana, and the crew here who take care of Cora as if she was there, because she is. And we walk around the university. We go any and everywhere that we went with Fred. And she's a part of me. She's a part of this environment just like I am.
And it all started with the work.
It all started with the Canine Trainers Program at Rockview.
actually met Irvin when he was in one of the classes inside.
Indeed.
And I remembered because of Fred. So I would spend my time playing with Fred when we were in class. So
you
while
were
they were
Fred's
doing art,
+1, really?
yeah, they were doing art, and I was playing with Fred. And so it was great to welcome Fred. And then Cora. I think Cora took like 6 months before she would like get from underneath the table, and now she's our buddy.
She sits on our feet until she's satisfied with how many pets we've given her.
Talk about the
She
growth.
decides.
Yeah.
Well, lastly, to sort of and first of all, thank you so much. I almost feel like I owe you an apology because I've known you. We've met a few times over the last couple of years, but I've never taken the opportunity to sit down with you and just learn your story. So I'm that much more grateful for you sharing today. I feel like I missed an opportunity, and I'm so glad that
we have this opportunity tonight, and I am so appreciative of it.
Well, likewise. Thank you to the two of you. I know we've worked together and we'll continue to work together to find support for this incredible program. But to sort of send us off, this is a question that I like to ask all the folks who join us. If you could thank one of your K through 12 teachers, who would it be and why?
Oh, that's easy for me. So I almost dropped out of school when I was in 10th grade, and I was up to a lot of things that were creating some hardships for my mother, and not attending classes, and just there's a version of me that took a very different road, and just did things and didn't get caught. And so there was a teacher, Ms. Zazas, and it was my math teacher, and she bumped into me in the halls, and I know you won't believe this, but I was pretty rebellious and like as a teenager. And rules? Yeah, me. And I was giving her a little bit of attitude, like, what do you want? You're just coming to scold me. And she took a very empathetic approach, and she talked to me, and she's like, you should really come back to class. And I was giving her attitude, like, well, you're gonna have to fail me because the school policy says that if I've skipped a certain amount of class. She's like, no, come back to class. And you work with me, I don't care what the policy says, I will work to make sure that you get the grade you need. She's like, you're really, she's like, you're a really smart guy. You should really consider like where what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go. And just, it was that moment that it was met with like empathy and love and compassion. And had she taken a different response, like what direction that would have put, 15, 16-year-old me who was like right, on the fence about what to do and where to go. And so thanks to her, I graduated, went to college, went to law school, and all the things. But, it was a reminder of like the things a teacher can do and shape, the lives of so many people. So I did get a chance to go see her and thank her. And I was like, I don't know if you remember me, but you had left such a great impact, and still thankful to this day. And it's not lost on me that, I take a similar approach. And so, carry a little bit of Ms. Zaza's and how I think about the world today.
Liana, how about you?
I've had a lot of really wonderful teachers in my life. But the first that came to mind when you asked the question was my mom. She worked in K-12, but not as a teacher. She was a physical therapist. So she was often working with the kids who were not in the mainstream classrooms. So it was a way where I got to know my peers who had intellectual and developmental disabilities that I wouldn't have otherwise. And she modeled for me what it looked like to talk to all people as people, no condescension, high standards for everybody. And I think back on that a lot as a model for how I go through the world.
How about you?
Oh, my response is a little different. I dropped out of school in the 9th grade, never went to high school. I dropped out because I was a truant, habitual truant, for a number of reasons, gang situations. In fact, I didn't have clothes to wear, a host of issues. And so I just stopped going to school. My mother she would go to court with my mother, with my father, and they would pay fines, or I would be sent away to a juvenile institution for a certain amount of time. And I had just come from a juvenile institution. I had made up my mind while I was there I was going to go to school every day while I was incarcerated. And I asked him, would this count when I leave it? He said, of course it would. This is Department of Education here as well. Because I wanted to graduate. I wanted to go to the 10th grade. I was already behind 2 years. So I was released, and my mother took us to school to enroll, and the counselor at that time said, well, Miss Moore, I'm sorry, but your son hasn't been here for the last year. She said, no, he was incarcerated, but he went to school there. She said, well, we have no record of it. I said, no, I went to school, and they told me that once I come out, that would count. And she said, well, it doesn't count here. And I was so angry. I was so distraught. I said, well, he says, you're going to have to finish up another year. That means I would be back in the same grade with my younger brother. And I couldn't countenance that. So I told my mother, I convinced her, you're either going to have to sign me out or I'm just not going again. And the counselor said, Miss Moore, it's not any problem. All you have to do is sign my head, and he'll be out of here today. That's the kind of help I got. So the teacher that I remember was an old head at Graterford Penitentiary. He wasn't a professional teacher, but he was a teacher. And he convinced me to go up to my cell with a book and read it and come back. And then only then I could take my place in the circle of old heads that stood around and just talked during the day. I wanted that so bad. I took the book upstairs, threw it in the corner, refused to read it, woke up the next morning, got the book, brought it downstairs, and said, here you go. He said, what do you think of that book? I said, it's a good book. He looked at me. He said, what do you think about the central protagonist? I thought he was speaking Latin. In a sense, he was. He said, Irvin, take this book upstairs and read it, because if you don't, I don't see you back down here again. I took the book again, stomped my way up to the stairs like a petulant child, sat on my bed, opened and said, man, I got to read. And I began to read. It was 5 o'clock in the evening, and the lights were turned off at 12 o'clock midnight. All of a sudden, I'm reading, and the lights went off. I said, oh, what? I screamed. I said, oh, what's going on? And the guys that were adjacent to the cells, adjacent to me, said, come on, Irv, stop all that noise. I said, man, what's wrong with the lights, man? He said, it's 12 o'clock, fool. I had started reading at 5 o'clock. This is 12 o'clock. I couldn't believe it. So, no lights in the cell, but the lights are in the corridor. There's lights in the corridor adjacent to my cell that filters through the door. You see the rays of light coming. Yeah. I took the book, sat on the door sill, took the book, put it in the rays, and then completed reading through the night.
What was the book?
Well, let me finish.
Sorry, of course you are. Of course you, yeah.
You know, next morning, I could not wait for line movement to walk downstairs, and I went downstairs. The guys were standing, old head standing in this circle. I walked up. He saw me coming. He looked in my eyes. He said, oh, you read that? You read that, didn't you? I said, I did. He says, okay, tell me about it. And in my own infantile, kind of immature way, I told him what I thought about the book. And he just looked at me, he says, all right, Joe, move over. That's your spot right there. And I went and moved into the circle. And I looked behind the circle, the periphery, I could see my peers, the young brothers, standing, looking, nudging us. Look, he's in there with the old heads. I felt so proud. The name of the book was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, logotherapist. And the reason why I felt a kinship with this, because this was a Nazi concentration camp. This is an educator, a logotherapist, a teacher. And he talked about man's nobility even in those kind of dire situations. And I found myself in dire situations like that and realized that they couldn't control who I am or who I was yet to be or who I became. could do that. And from that point on, I fell in love with education. I fell in love with the path that I began to find myself on, which is the path that I continue today.
Wow. I can't think of a better point to stop than that.
Which means he will be graduating in a year. So it's a path. It's an incredible path. Graduating from Penn State within a year. So it's pretty incredible.
And then we'll work together on an alumni capacity.
Indeed.
Well, thank you all, Irvin, Liana, Efrain. Thank you very much.
Our pleasure.
And we appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It's our pleasure. All right.